But they didn't take it on as part of the Constitution. They're supposed to defend, the federal government is supposed to defend our country.
Right. Okay. So this is part of the common defense, and then there's an issue there's a part of the Constitution where it talks about the rules of naturalization, which they said, but the immigration process itself is sort of left wide open. But under national security, absolutely. And so I think it's an appropriate role for them to play. On the one hand, on the other hand, if they're going to be derelict in their duty, then don't blame a state like Arizona, which has to deal with those consequences, for coming up with the laws that make sense for them.
So what do we do about the border, though? I mean, what should be done? If you were in Congress now and could propose something that would happen, what would you propose?
I would propose that we stop the mandates, all the spending that the federal government forces on the states. I think the biggest mandate is the birthright citizenship, and I know some guys have taken heat for that.
That's in the Constitution, sort of.
Well, it's in the 14th Amendment, but still, I mean, I think we're the only country in the world that does this.
That's right.
It creates all sorts of difficulty. And I have some good friends who are very uncomfortable about saying no amnesty. Of course, I am a no amnesty guy, but their issue about it is, well, if you have this birthright citizenship and you have the anchor babies, it will tear families apart. Well, I say don't have the anchor babies, don't have the birthright citizenship, and then no amnesty is I'm much more comfortable with it, more comfortable than I am now.
I personally don't think it's our obligation to worry about tearing families apart. If they choose to do that, then they can choose to take their baby home and raise them in their own country, and then if the kid's an American citizen, when he comes back, he's still a citizen.
No, and I agree with you. That's why I don't mind saying no amnesty. But I do understand that there's a human factor in there, and we can mitigate that by saying no birthright citizenship. And I'd also say, though, another area where the federal government has been remiss in its duties is that they have not had a good temporary worker program here for a long time.
That's right.
And why don't we have that? I mean, why can't we have that? That worked very well. I think maybe the unions aren't terribly happy with a temporary worker program. That could have something to do with it. But let's get that going again, and I think it'll, again, mitigate a lot of these problems.
Exactly. If the argument is that they're just coming to work in the fields because Americans won't do those jobs, which is, you can argue that. The fact remains is, yes, have the worker program. They did it with the Bracero program, and it worked very nicely. For the time that we had it.
Absolutely. And if we have an economy that's robust enough, lucky enough to have one, where we actually need workers to come in, the federal government should get out there and do its job and get the American businesses the workers that they need in order to create more wealth.
And speaking of the farming, now we have a situation in the Central Valley where they have cut off the water in order to protect the fish. And allowed thousands of acres to go fallow, and bankrupting. I think the unemployment in the Central Valley is like 18 or 20%. I mean, it's huge compared to the state as a whole. I mean, how do we deal with that, where the EPA, where the environmentalists have such incredible power over us that can destroy whole sections of the economy?
Yeah, I have, in all the Tea Party speeches I've done, irrespective of where they are, including when I did one in Fresno, I made sure I mentioned that because that's the perfect example of the federal government coming in, stepping in and creating a problem where one didn't exist. If this non-indigenous Delta smelt,
right,
that is, if it's having problems there, it's not because of the water levels. There are 50 million other reasons, including the fact that there are pollutants being poured in every day from all over Northern California into that delta. I think that, by the way, you mentioned unemployment. The unemployment in some of those counties is 50%. Some portions of some counties, some counties, it's 50%.
Wow.
It's a real travesty. I think that everyone needs to make this their problem, because if the federal government can create a problem out of thin air for those folks, they can do it for you. So we all need to be aware. I think that the administration could resolve it. Congress could go ahead and put a temporary injunction on the Endangered Species Act. That's the best thing that Congress, I think, can do.
Right.
I think at the end of the day, the federal government keeps pressing its luck, though. You're going to see states really begin to stand up and say, no more, we're not paying attention to this, and they're going to take these things over, and the federal government is going to have its authority challenged.
I think it's inevitable. It's a whole states' rights issue. I've said this before. I could see the seeds of it with the Arizona and other states saying, yeah, we want to do the same thing. And the feds can't sue every state. I mean, they don't have the right to do that anyway. I mean, they have the right to sue, I guess, perhaps, but they don't have the right to take over states' rights.
Oh, absolutely not. And I think, I'd say 95% of the problems that we're facing today is because we've got a federal government that's gone way beyond its constitutional limits. I mean, and I might be generous with 95%. So I think that the people need to withdraw their consent by voting only for people who recognize that and will constrain the government. But I also think the states need to step up, and they are.
Yeah, they're starting to. Thank goodness.
To handle these things and say no, you've overstepped your boundaries.
Yeah,
they have every right to do that. It goes back to the Virginia and Kentucky resolves of 1798,
which were. Refresh me on my history.
Those were written by anonymously by Jefferson and Madison, and they were resolves that went against John Adams' Alien and Seditions Act, and they said, we're not enforcing them, we're not abiding by this, you've overstepped your boundaries. And Madison made it clear in the fact that he wrote it, and he is the father of the Constitution, that act nullifying a law by the federal government was indeed a constitutional act.
Well, that's good. So the history is there. The constitutional basis. It doesn't mean they won't overstep it, but at least it's possible to do it.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yep.
Let's go to the phones. We have Robert calling from Palo Alto. Robert, you're on the air with my guest, John Dennis, on KSFO. Go ahead.
Barbara, welcome back.
Thank you.
From your extended family here in Radioland.
I appreciate that, Robert. Thanks.
Indeed. And if Mr. Swanson is listening, I just want to thank him again. And the KSFO management team for having you on Saturdays and Sundays. And also, Barbara, you're a fantastic show in and of itself, but also the preamble to the John Batchelor show, which on Sundays, as you know, immediately follows.
Yes, right. Good. Thank you.
And I think Mr. Dennis would enjoy listening to that, too. He probably does.
Okay.
And
what do you want to ask him?
I want to ask Mr. Dennis. Actually, it's a comment. I had a question, but 2 minutes ago, Mr. Dennis just started to touch on the subject that I would have hoped he would have started, actually, his commentary, and that is the Senate's obligation to legislate within the authority of the United States Constitution. What you and Dennis, Mr. Dennis, were just discussing to me is of paramount importance, and I think it would do him a lot of good service if he were to start on that. I heard early in the interview, some key priorities, and I heard...
All right, what is your question of him now?
Well, my question of him right now is, does he consider the point of campaigning on the strength of the United States Constitution to be of value in the city of San Francisco? I heard the words open-minded, and that startled me. So I just want to guess. I would love to hear Mr. Dennis's posture on whether he would like to drive his campaign on the
constitutional issue. Okay, I'll ask him that, and he will respond. Thank you for that, Robert. Appreciate it. And folks, keep in mind, we started a conversation. He wasn't giving a speech. We were talking about a whole lot of things, and it was by my choice of what I asked him of what we talked about, not anything that he had any preset conditions. So we're just having a conversation.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Now, what about would you focus a major part of your campaign on the constitutional issues rather than specific issues that you're dealing with?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think I know where he's going. I think folks on the right tend to like discussions of the Constitution on certain issues. Yeah, I do. I think if you're gonna go out, the Constitution is a great document in that it also appeals to the left. I try not to get too involved in the left-right battle because I think it's a diversion that takes us away from the real battle, which is the expansion of the federal government beyond its constitutional constraints. So if I can go back to the Constitution and with the folks on the left and show how the federal government has expanded in the area of civil liberties, for example, Nancy Pelosi, it's still not clear what she knew and when she knew it, but apparently you may remember that there was that warrantless wiretapping that was going on at that Folsom Street building after 9/11. Well, as it turns out, it was going on prior to 9/11. They were doing warrantless wiretaps out of that building.
Were they?
Yeah, wow. And Nancy Pelosi has been asked. No one with a straight face believes that she didn't know about it. She's never answered the question. I want to know what she knew and when she knew it. And so there's a situation where we can use the Constitution as a stepping stone into challenging the federal government on civil liberties.